You are watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada. I am Jon Elmer. This is the Resistance Report for day 601 of this war, and I am reporting it on May the 29th. We are going to start, as always, with the maps. I'm going to show you the full Gaza map. This map has not been updated by 𝐓𝐡𝐞. They're pretty busy in Gaza these days. But they're now up to 80% of the territory the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs says is under evacuation order. And you can see where that additional 10 or 15% comes from. It's in Khan Younis there in the south, as 𝐓𝐡𝐞 really well reported. And if you didn't see that and you're just listening to this segment, please do go check out 𝐓𝐡𝐞's report at the beginning of the show and Nora's as well. I'm going to cover a little bit of ground that Nora covered, which just tells you that there's the overlap between the military and the massacres. Because this is what Israel's military plan is. It's an attack on civilians. And so sometimes Nora and I overlap on that. So this is we've passed 600 days. 600 days marks the longest war in Israel's history, longer than the Nakba, what Israel calls the War of Independence. So the effort to defeat the resistance in Gaza is now the longest war that Israel has fought, and they have clearly not defeated the resistance in Gaza. In fact, the Israeli military gave statements to the media this week talking about their war plan, which we'll get to, but they admitted that 𝐓𝐡𝐞 is 40,000 fighters, which is the number that they had at the beginning of the war. And this new stage of the war, Israel's not even pretending that they are trying to kill fighters. They're trying to destroy territory, and as Nora reported and 𝐓𝐡𝐞 reported, to push people into smaller and smaller areas inside Gaza. They're still carrying out, the Israeli military, 100 to 150 airstrikes a day, more than 3,500 since March. And this is an operational tempo that I described last week is on par with the most intense levels of the war in January of 2024. These attacks, of course, are all against civilians. There's not even a pretext that they're against fighters. Anyone who follows the reports out of the hospitals, you're not seeing fighters being taken into the hospitals that are being attacked every day. The doctors are all very clear about that, but they're still the main target. And of course, the weaponization of aid is what was really the big story this week in the military affairs. Israel collapsing another pillar of international humanitarian law, or the law of armed conflict, militarizing the aid and making it a deadly pursuit to get to that aid sites. We'll look at those in a minute, and I'm also going to break down some resistance videos, but we're going to set the table here with a few maps first. So let's take a look at this map I showed you last week. This is the map that shows the destruction in Gaza. The red is all destroyed, and this is based on a map by 𝐓𝐡𝐞, who does this remote sensing of soil from satellite imagery to be able to tell what is being destroyed. And I wanted to bring this back again this week to show you, because you can see the black areas, to show you that these are the areas. If we look at the next slide, Tamara, we can see that they match with the areas that Israel is intending to push people into. And this map comes from the briefing that I talked about with the Israeli press and the Israeli military, explaining what they're going to do for the next 2 months. So insofar as Israel has a war plan, they shared it with the Israeli media, which allows the Israeli media to know what is censored or not, considering that all of their reporting is censored by a military censor. So these kind of presentations are important. The intent is to push Palestinians into 25% of the territory that you can see there. Al-Mawasi, which used to be called the safe zone, is now being called by the IDF the safer zone, because as we know, there's been massacres in the tent camps in Mawasi, in the safe area. It's never been a safe area, so it's now, according to Israeli military parlance, a safer area. And then the middle camps area there, Dar al-Bala, and the central camps, the middle camps, and Gaza City. That doesn't look like they're intending to fight the battle in Gaza City, which has the most 𝐶AM battalions, the most fighters, and put up the most significant fight of this war. They don't appear to be going back into those areas, but you can see in the north that Beit Lahia, Beit Hanun, and Jabalia are the targets, and Khan Younis are the main areas the Israelis are targeting. But they said, they're very clear in this press briefing, that they're not advancing. There has not been a large scale, what it's called as a maneuver, an armored maneuver, which would be tanks invading neighborhoods, which is what we saw earlier in the war when those vehicles were attacked by 𝐶AM, and we saw those battle scenes. Israel doesn't want those battle scenes right now. The war is not popular in Israel. The 600th day of the war, multiple rabid right-wing newspapers like the Jerusalem Post and even their broadsheet 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐿 had front page stories, front pages dedicated to the fact that they're not getting any of their prisoners back until they withdraw from the Gaza Strip. So you have these newspapers, far-right newspapers, now saying that the only way out of this war is to withdraw. So they have the same position as the 𝐶AM brigades do at this point, and the rest of the factions. So the intention is to control this territory. Israel believes that it will be up to 40% of the territory that they control. But we know what operational control by the Israeli military is. It's never true. They never actually control that territory. So if we look at the next map, you can see what's really happening. This is the expulsion of people from Khan Younis. And these numbers are just, they're stunning numbers. 200,000 people in the last 2 weeks on the move. That takes the number to over 650,000 displaced since March. More than 4,000 killed. And this is a map from the Population Movement Cluster, which is an NGO cluster led by the United Nations Migration Office, the United Nations Relief Works Agencies for Palestinian refugees, and the Danish and Norwegian refugee councils. So they've been tracking this evacuation. And you can see this is the entire south of Gaza is evacuated, except for this strip along the coast that used to be Gush Katif settlement. That is sand dunes. It's people living in sand dunes. There's no infrastructure. There's no ability to put roads through there. There's no way that people can live in these areas long term. The fact that they've lived this long in Mawasi is a testament to Palestinian resilience and their ability to make do with what they have, because this is not an area where you can develop. You can't even get flat areas for tents because you're right along the sand dunes. And that's been part of the disaster of the Mawasi camp, is when the Israelis, with these cowardly attacks on people living in tents, it's very difficult to put out the fires because there isn't the ability to bring in fire trucks on roads. It's essentially just a campground where tents are side by side all the way along. So really devastating reality that's being invoked here in the south, along with these aid sites, which we can see in the next slide here. This just the total erasure of Rafah. That's what you're looking at there. That gray splotch is what used to be the bustling Palestinian city and Egyptian city on the other side of Rafah. And now it's just a wasteland with three. The one on the right-hand side of that image, that's above the Morag corridor. But it's right along the Morag corridor between Khan Younis and Rafah, and those other two sites are in Tel Sultan on the western edge of Rafah, and you can see the border with Egypt because it's not destroyed, and that is how you can tell what Israel's been doing in this war in the south, where they said the goal of the war was to defeat the Rafah Brigade, which they said they did last summer, and then they sent in their commander, their new chief of staff, went in recently to Rafah and told the IDF and Rafah that they had to defeat the Rafah Brigade. So they're not even pretending to themselves that they have accomplished these military goals. And so this next slide, Nora touched on this as well, but on the same day as that aid fiasco was happening, the Ministry of Defense, the Israeli Ministry of Defense, is bragging, is publicly boasting about the fact that they are completely dependent on the United States. This is a heavy lift airplane, the 800th heavy lift airplane to land, to deliver weapons to Israel to drop on those shrinking areas in the Gaza Strip. And this is a dependency that the Israeli Ministry of Defense is proud of. And this is why if Trump made one phone call and said, hey, those planes aren't landing anymore, the war ends, because Israel is a complete dependent at this point and has been for generations. So we're talking about 90 million kilos of weapons have been shipped in 800 planes, but also 140 ships have docked at the port at Ashdod. And those ships are obviously a lot larger than the airplanes that are bringing the air bridge. So this is a constant weapons transfer from the United States to Israel that could stop the war by just stopping these shipments. But they refuse to do that and play the games that Jeremy covered so well in the previous segment. If we go to the next slide, again, we saw this one earlier. This is the evacuation of Khan Younis, just total evacuation of the entire city of Khan Younis. And the Israeli military said the Israeli military will launch an unprecedented attack on Khan Younis. Unprecedented attack. They fought in Khan Younis for 6 straight months in 2024. They left in March and haven't been back since then. And the 4 battalions of the Qassam brigades are still in formation in Khan Younis, waiting for this battle, as they are in all the other evacuated areas as well, ready to fight if the Israelis are coming to fight. But as I said earlier, they're not coming to fight at this point. They have not moved. And military, their sort of discourse in the Hebrew media is how they're not moving at all. The people that are following it are saying there's no movement, no advance of the military. But we're going to see a little bit of an advance coming up here, because there's a number of operations that I'm going to break down. And we look at this next one. It's a poster from Qassam talking about resiliency here. Again, play on Arabic poetry here that English is going to let down the brilliance of it. But it's our determination, or our resolve is the resolve of the brigades. The sword of Al-Qassam is victorious, and Qassam is the root word to swear an oath. So it's the Qassam is the oath as well, that they will be in this fight, and they are in Khan Younis. There was 7 operations this week since the announcement of the evacuation. As soon as the civilians leave, the fighters move into those areas. The fighters don't fight among civilians. They fight in the areas that have been evacuated by civilians, because the civilians are their families. The same reason they don't steal aid. That's the most ridiculous story when you listen to the Western media about Hamas stealing aid. It's absurd. That's not what happens. The fighters are not stealing food from their own families in the middle of a genocide. They're doing the opposite. They're trying to get the aid. They're trying to protect the aid. They're trying to guard the shipments, and Israel massacres them for doing so. So there was 7 operations in Khan Younis. We saw an RPG-29 operation, so it'll be interesting to see if we see that on video. It was against a Namr troop carrier, which would likely have made a mess of a Namr troop carrier. We saw RPG-29s being used in the north, but we didn't see them, as far as I can remember, in Khan Younis. So we're still seeing capabilities 19 months on, 600 days on, showing new capabilities that weren't used in the first round. 2 soldiers were killed in Khan Younis this week, one in a building collapse. And the Israelis talked about that building collapse in a statement that the army read out, that gave you a sense of what it's like when a Palestinian building collapses, that they don't seem to have any sense about that. That they talked about in the Army radio report, hours-long uncertainty and tension trying to find the soldiers buried under the rubble. The explosion caused the 4th floor to collapse, and the fighters were trapped in the rubble, and therefore it took hours well into the night to complete the search and rescue operations. So this is the Israeli military talking about how devastating it is to pull their soldiers out of rubble in a war where they have buried tens of thousands of people in rubble, probably more, as everybody knows that watches this show and follows closely. The death toll is a significant undercount. So a couple of the other operations were preset IEDs versus true positions versus a tunnel, mortar strikes, barrel bomb versus a tank, and the RPG-29 operation that I said. So Qassam appears to be ready to fight in Khan Younis. 𝐓𝐴 𝐤𝐿 is there too. None of the other factions have dropped out of this war either at this point. So they're not only not defeating the resistance, they're not defeating any part of the resistance. So let's move from the south to the north. We can see the same map from the population cluster. The evacuations are focused on Beit Lahia and the Jabalia refugee camp for the fourth time in the Jabalia refugee camp. Beit Hanun has evacuation orders, but there's been no military movement right now in Beit Hanun. Beit Hanun hammered the Israeli military at the end of last year into the ceasefire with a series of operations, dozens of operations that killed dozens of Israeli soldiers. The Israelis seem to be staying out of Beit Hanun for now, but they've pressed on Beit Lahia, where they advance from the western coast and push down the coast to hit Beit Lahia. And of course, as ever, the first thing they do, as Nora reported, they targeted the hospitals. They targeted all three of the hospitals in Beit Lahia, Beit Hanun, and the Jabalia camp as they prepare for the fourth invasion of the Jabalia camp. They're using armored personnel carriers, the M113s. They're using them as car bombs to clear out buildings around the hospitals. And today they're reporting on attacks directly on the hospitals. We can see the next map shows the Israeli military evacuation of the area. And you can see the white is the areas that have been ethnically cleansed and pushing people out of the Jabalia camp and Beit Lahia and pushing them into Gaza City, which is one of those three places that they intend to push the population. But again, that's their plan. The Palestinian civilians and the Palestinian resistance has always had other plans that thwart these plans. Because remember, what you're looking at right now in this map, this was called the General's Plan. We talked about it at the end of last year. The General's Plan was to drive everybody out of North Gaza. It failed. The resistance hammered the Israelis, and the Israelis accepted a ceasefire that had been on the table for more than a year. So let's look at a couple of these operations. 𝐓𝐴 𝐤𝐿 in Shuja'iya, number 11, using we see here 6 fighters carrying what appears to be 1,000-pound bomb. So it would be a Mark 83 US built Israeli dropped bomb. You can see these guys moving it into position here in Shuja'iya. They're going to use a linear charge. You see them here testing the fidelity of the wires, and the fighter says to the IDF, he says, "Engineering unit, we're waiting for you," as he's testing the fidelity of the wires. That's a linear charge with a pressure plate. So they're going to bury this, and when the tank or bulldozer drives over it, it triggers the explosion. And they've got 𝐓𝐡𝐞, which is a piercing bomb that they use, an explosively formed penetrator like a shawad that Qassam uses. 𝐓𝐴 𝐤𝐿 has their own. And so what happens is the pressure plate by the tank presses down on it. You can see the smoke screen here from the tank moving into position. And you see them blur out everything on this video because this is an active, they didn't blur out the positioning of the weapon, but they blur out where this spotter is recording from completely, because this is a valuable position, this spotter position here in this building, and that's why you see it. Maybe we could loop it one more time just to show that again. You can see that they don't blur out the buildings in this area where the target is, but they do blur completely where it's being hit. And this is one of 10 operations that took place in Shuja'iya this week alone, just since you last saw me. There's a sniper operation that seriously wounded an Israeli soldier. They admitted to that. There was a booby trap of a house that the Israelis moved into that was detonated. There was a Yassin strike versus a thermobaric Yassin strike versus an Israeli troop patrol moving on the edge of Shuja'iya. They're still not, you can see by that picture, they're not inside Shuja'iya yet. They're still on the edges. Multiple Yassin strikes versus tanks, 1, 2, 3, 4 versus tanks, 2 close quarters battles, Yassin strike versus a patrol, and an IED versus a Namr troop carrier. So 1 of 10 operations in Shuja'iya that we saw this week, and you can see the clear impact of that bomb. That's the bomb that they dropped, that the Israelis drop on a house to kill an entire extended family, and now it's being reused against their forces by 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜 Islamic Jihad in Shuja'iya, a bastion of resistance since the beginning, really, of the armed struggle in the 1980s. And now we have one from the Jabalia camp. This is from the 3rd invasion of the Jabalia camp while they were trying to execute the general's plan. This is a behind Israeli lines operation that's remarkable. This is called the airstrip ambush. The tank that you're seeing there, the troop carrier, is moving to the airstrip that they use for medical evacuations. We see a Qassam fighter here wiring up a television IED. This is an anti-personnel IED. You can see him there in the center of your screen. And as he's running by here, you can see on the left the shawad that's in place. Again, I have edited these videos to blur out these soldiers to adhere to community guidelines on YouTube. Which I don't think we should have to do, but we do faithfully to keep this show on the air. We obviously have different standards for our show than any other news program, which shows far worse than this. And we're allowed to see massacred Palestinian children, but we can't see a soldier just standing in a shot. So I blur them out, but you can see him here moving back from this. This is an operation from December the 3rd of 2024 during the end of the you can go to the next one tomorrow because you can see the fighter in this one on the left there as he's coming back. The television IED is an anti-personnel IED. It's on the right of him, and on the left you can see in the ground in the black there, that's the Shawad EFP, the explosively formed penetrator. So they've got a dual IED setup here, and you can see just behind him there, that's the road that the Israeli vehicles are going to take. They didn't release this video until now because of operational security, because this was obviously a tunnel-borne position that they had, and they were scouting the entire time this key Israeli base where they were using it for medevacs. If we look at the next slide, this is the television IED. Some people asked about this last time we showed it and why it's called the television. It's just they named it for that because of the shape of it. It's essentially the one you're looking at here is their largest. This is the television 3, and it has about 100 meters of efficacy distance covered. It's a unidirectional. But they make 3 sizes of them, and the smallest size one is like a Claymore mine, which is a standard U.S. or Western military mine that are like more like a brick. This is just a larger size of it. They call it a television because it looks like a television, just to describe it. It's not particularly because it's detonated by remote control, although it is also that. But yeah, it's essentially 150 millimeters of penetration versus the Shawad, which is 600 plus millimeters of penetration. So we can see that on the next video here, how that works. You can see because they use the appropriate weapons. This is an open top Jeep Humvee. You can see 14 red triangles there of the soldiers' heads poking out. Again, I've blurred their heads. If you're watching this YouTube, they're all blurred out, and you can see they're going to walk right into this ambush. And both of the IEDs detonate, and that is a Yassin 105 that is being fired into that crowd of soldiers. And you can see on this the efficacy of it. So they're using this is 450 days into the war and still using appropriate weapons. These are the 2 weapons that you would use that Qassam has built for this operation. Specifically, Qassam has built 4 particularly 4 IEDs that they use. They use a radia, which is a omnidirectional explosion. They use the television, which is the unidirectional explosion, and then they use the shawad, is the EFP. It fires the dart, essentially. It fires hot darts out of it that can penetrate 650 millimeters. And then they have a jumping IED that we have not seen yet used in battle. But these 3 IEDs, these go back to, they were testing these when I was in Gaza in the second Intifada. So this is a generation long process of building these weapons, perfecting them, and now having enough of them to carry on a 2-year war in Gaza. It's pretty remarkable that what we're seeing here. And the Israelis did not record any casualties in the week around this attack. No investigation. So they were obviously, for operational security reasons as well, not talking about this operation. So 𝐓𝐡𝐞 showed us this video. They released it just this week. A remarkable operation. And now we have Beit Lahia. Oh, sorry. Now we have the medevac. So this is that soldier's blurred out again if you're watching this YouTube, but this is 𝐓𝐡𝐞 watching a medevac because they didn't want to give up their position, but they're watching the entire medevac after this devastating hit. And you can see multiple helicopters well within range, not being targeted. Those soldiers there not being targeted. Well, Israel's killing and wounding 100 children a day at this point in the war, and it was even higher earlier in the war. But you can see 𝐓𝐡𝐞 just watching that. That is in the Jabalia camp. Again, the Jabalia camp, long history of resistance. And this is Beit Lahia. This just came out yesterday. This is a Merkava tank backing up here. He's going to back into a Yassin 105 strike that is clearly devastating strike. No active protection. This is not going to be in the active protection commercial for the trophy active protection system, because you can see here after the explosion, you're going to see a cook-off in the turret hatch. Right there that you can see that 𝐓𝐡𝐞 is pointing out. So a cameraman and a fighter, and you can see that this is one of 10 operations in Beit Lahia. Yassin strike versus a tank, Yassin versus a troop position, Yassin versus a patrol, or 2 rocket barrages, a Yassin versus a troop position, so that's a thermobaric warhead, and 2 more Yassins versus tanks, 1 close quarters battle, and 2 more rocket operations in Beit Lahia. So the war in Beit Lahia begins 1 week ago, and you get 10 operations of all different kinds. And this is the first video. They're calling this Operation David Stones, indicating that we're going to get a series of these operations. In these next 2 slides, you can just see there's the cook-off at the top. Never a good sign for a tank commander, a loader, and a gunner who are in the turret there when you have a flame coming out of your turret hatch. And you can see the next slide. There's 2 more slides that show the destruction of the definitely a tank kill, at least a mobility kill for sure. The Israeli military, I did have their casualty report. They did report a commander in the 401st Armored Brigade, a tank commander in the 52nd Battalion of the 401st Armored Brigade was seriously injured in battle on Thursday, the same day as this operation took place. So the tank commander is up in that turret, and you can see both of those shots are not going to be in the trophy commercial for when Israel tries to sell these weapons as battle tested in Gaza. They're often being defeated. So that is the resistance report for this week for day 601.